So it's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Nick Talley. Nick is a colleague and mentor of mine for 10 years now, and I can say over the 10 years there are three things that I know he's always been very passionate about. They are medical journals, leadership and climate, and his talk now is actually going to cover all three. So he's going to present on medical journal editorship, leadership and the climate emergency. What can you do? Thank you very much.
So thanks, Simon, and thanks for having me do this talk, which I hope will be interesting and fun. Let me just get the button to work first. And there we go. So I'm going to cover really some issues that I think are very relevant to journal editors, because I'm going to argue, try and convince you, if you're not convinced already, that the voice of medicine, which includes the voice through journals, is critical if we're going to deal with this mega trend, which is the climate emergency. I'm going to try and convince you there is a climate emergency. Most of you may already feel there is, but I can assure you there are many colleagues of mine, I'm talking about important academics, important clinicians and others, who see this as a political issue. Right wing, left wing, in between wing, I'm not sure where. So I think it's important we at least discuss what the science is, talk about what journal editors should do, and of course I'm going to have ChatGPT help me with that, because what do you do these days? You ask ChatGPT, and I'm going to tell you what I think we should be doing, and then I'm going to hopefully have discussion with you and see what you all think. I want to again acknowledge the Awabakal peoples, the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today here in the Hunter, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So journal editors have been active. Ginny showed you a slide this morning of one article that appeared in hundreds of journals. This is one I was involved with just before that one, that also appeared in hundreds of journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, the MJA and many others. And here a group of journal editors said, we have a global emergency, we've got to do something about this, it really, really matters. And you might say, well, that's great, that's what we should do, that's all we need to do. We just need to highlight there's a problem, we just need to let people know there's a real issue, and it'll all fall into place. But let me take you to the global hub of misinformation on climate in the world, the global hub in the world. And here it is, in Australia, through Sky News, at least according to The Guardian. And we have a number of presenters there, particularly the evening presenters on Sky News, who talk about this issue as a political issue, that this issue doesn't actually exist. If you listen to someone like Andrew Bolt, he will tell you that global cooling is going to be the problem, and we should be worried about that. And that's going to kill more people than global heating, which I'm going to talk about going forward. But what's interesting is if you do fact checks on what's being said, at least according to the so-called experts, there appears to be real false information here. And I've used this slide in a talk of mine when I spoke to the Doctors for the Environment Australia group, which I happen to be the chair of the board, as a conflict of interest statement. And after I presented this slide at the DEA meeting, which was a closed meeting, it was photographed, filmed and brought back to me on Sky News. And I appeared, without me being there actually, but I appeared on Sky News, pictures of me, and I was labelled a hypocrite for talking about this information in the way I had done. And indeed, there is no global climate emergency, it's all false, according to these pundits. So let's talk about the science a little bit. What's the real science? What do we know about this? I'll cover that area. Why are health professionals? Why should we care? What should we do? What do we need to do? And so forth. So the first thing is the science. We've known this for more than 100 years. It's terrifying. Margaret Thatcher talked about this as a serious crisis issue in the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher was that left-wing Prime Minister in the UK, if you remember her clearly. You know, very, very left-wing in inverted commas, lots of inverted commas. And we know that the short, wave solar radiation, comes through the atmosphere. It gets radiated back, as it's shown on the diagram here. But the important thing is some of this solar radiation is absorbed by the Earth's surface, but the greenhouse gases really lead to it coming back, as shown on this slide. We get this problem of the molecules of carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and methane really acting as these greenhouse gases. And of course, it's largely fossil fuel burning that drives this increase in greenhouse gases. So according to the estimates from the experts, and this was in the Medical Journal of Australia, a peer-reviewed article that we commissioned because we wanted to present to doctors the science of global warming. This article talked about the problem in 2018. Talked about the current temperatures really would be higher except for the cooling of air pollution, that if we go to 5 degrees above our current estimates, then we will actually face a global crisis that we can't imagine. It was really quite terrifying. We're heading, though, according to this article in 2018, to at least 3 to 4 degrees increase at the present time, and that has not changed. That is still the current estimate. And indeed, this article argued to get to truly net zero, we needed to take out greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Now, that was obviously rather concerning. And what are the health implications of this? There are many, from bushfires to droughts, which we've seen in this country. We've seen bushfires and droughts that have been very significant. But more recently, we've seen increased rainfall and floods up in Lismore, for example, in northern New South Wales. And this is again thought to be and attributed to be related to climate change. We're seeing more heat-related deaths around the world. There have been reports by WHO in India and elsewhere now of much more heat-related deaths across the equatorial areas. We have the risk of contaminated drinking water, infectious diseases, more allergies. We've had thunderstorm asthma episodes, a really enormously concerning episode in Melbourne a few years ago. Increased mental health issues related to this, fear of climate change being one of the reasons for the drive in mental health, at least has been attributed to that. We are expecting to see in the future, the near future, more crop failures and hunger, mass migration, and probably resource wars. And the reason for this is, of course, the rise in global temperature and the fact that, in fact, our ability to adapt to heat-related stress is much more limited than our ability to adapt to cold stress. And the risks of this have been well documented in the scientific literature, as also summarised in this MJA article. The oceans have warmed more than we would ever expect. In fact, there were reports recently suggesting that we're in a situation where we're going to not be able to reverse this at all. The oceans are already gone, was a headline in the Atlantic just this year. And we've had the highest global temperatures ever recorded this year. And that's really worrying. And what's really even more concerning is, according to the models that have been created, we're right on track for the disasters that people have talked about theoretically. So again, very, very worrying. You might ask, well, what are the risks of some of this? Well, for example, in the bushfire areas and related areas in Australia, and these include the capital cities, there was enormous exposure to particulate matter, tiny particulate matter, what's called PM 2.5, which occurred across, for example, the capital cities of Sydney and Melbourne. And it's thought that these toxic materials really are silent killers in the long term and the short term, and there's an association with increased mortality and morbidity with higher exposure to PM 2.5 levels. In fact, any exposure is a risk, any exposure. And the populations of Sydney and Melbourne have certainly been exposed, as have other cities around the country. The other issue is and we live in Newcastle, so we have to talk about coal, is actually fossil fuels and fossil fuel, both extraction, burning and removal of waste. And indeed, there is good evidence, unfortunately, because of the PM 2.5 problem from the release of coal, that this is a problem that Newcastle and any other place nearby where coal mining is occurring puts the populations locally at significant risk. And WHO and other places, other groups have come up with numbers about premature deaths related to the use of coal. And there's absolutely no doubt that there are increased premature deaths. The estimates are currently about 8 million annually around the world. There's even a calculation for how many terawatt hours of coal burnt, how many people will die. And while these are estimates, they seem to be reasonably robust. So air pollution's a problem. Increased cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, increased cancers are clearly part of the problem. And I've already mentioned these issues with food and water insecurity that really we're starting to see already. And the issue of mass migration and nationalism are clearly going to be global trends that we're going to have to face down the track. And then finally, the issue of deforestation is also terribly important. We're cutting down our native forests around the world. There have been estimates that, I don't know, within 100 years or so we may no longer have any native forests. That seems a little perhaps extreme, but regardless it is a significant problem. Now, fossil fuels lead us to plastic production. They're required for the production of plastics. And microplastics and nanoplastics are in almost everybody sitting in this audience. And you have little bits of plastic floating around your bloodstream, little bits of plastic in your brain, little bits of plastic in your reproductive organs, little bits of plastic in your gut, and incredibly, little bits of plastic in your coronary plaque. And if you have some coronary plaque, which most of us over a certain age have, then you probably have some wonderful microplastics in there, and your risk of death from cardiovascular events is significantly increased, as documented in this New England Journal article that came out this year. And I haven't put up the brain article because it's too depressing to show you, but that looks really awful. So you might say, okay, well, yep, okay, it's a health hazard. Fossil fuels are a health hazard, no doubt about that. And global warming is a health hazard, no doubt about that, okay? But there's hope, isn't there? Because we had COP28 most recently, and in fact the deal in Dubai where COP28 was held last year was really, they call for the world to transition away from fossil fuels in the energy systems because fossil fuels are a health hazard. They had a little bit of problem coming to this agreement. They had, as you remember, there was some real arguments about this, but they did sign off on this. And that's marvellous. You might say, well, we're doing something about this and the world recognises this is a problem. But not everybody's got the story. The fossil fuel executives have decided that this is a pure fantasy. The idea that we're going to move away from fossil fuels. The idea that we're going to go to green energy because that is what is required to solve the global warming crisis and the health risks that fossil fuels and global warming pose. The United States is actually now producing more oil than ever. If Mr. Trump wins the election, it's drill, baby, drill. Drill, baby, drill. Wonderful, isn't it? That's what we really need. More of fossil fuel production so we can get rich early on and then die a miserable death later. The world's scientists have been warning about this. I've been working with some of these people and I've spoken to some of these people, and it's terrifying every time I talk to a climate expert, a climate scientist who really knows the science. Seriously. They present a picture that's more depressing than the one I'm presenting today. And it's really disturbing. And they've been warning about this for years and years and being ignored. And it's worse today in terms of being ignored than it ever was. I've already mentioned that the planet's heading for an increase that is potentially disastrous, and we're on that track right now. We're not off the track, and we're not even close. And I'll come back to what the Australian government's doing in a minute. So I mentioned this already, drill baby drill. This came, of course, from the wonderful politicians in the United States, and indeed there's clearly a group who believe this very much. I prefer that people think about it this way: it's burn baby burn. It's a much more apt slogan because that's what they're promoting. That's what they're promoting, whether we like it or not. And if you talk to the UN Secretary General, you get a depressing picture as well. He wrote this a couple of years ago, but he's written similar things more recently. We're on the pathway to global warming of more than double the 1.5 degree limit agreed to in Paris. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing, but doing another. He's just called them liars. Pretty strong words. So what about us? Most of us are health professionals in this room. What about us? What does this mean for us as health professionals, as journal editors? And I think what this means is, like any emergency, any health emergency, we have a duty of care. Others have argued this, and I think it's been very well expressed in this article in Cell, which is why I've quoted this particular one, where it's been suggested we need to be educating others. That's a medical editing issue. We need to be growing research in this area, encouraging it for our journals. We need to drive resilience. We can also do that through the pages of our journals. We need to promote decarbonisation. I'll come back to that, what journals should be doing and what journals aren't doing. And of course, we need to convince the public there's a problem and counter the misinformation that we see. And the misinformation is very concerning, and we continue to have this. And as Joseph Goebbels knew, if you call a lie, if you tell a lie and you keep telling the same lie and repeating the same lie, eventually people believe it's the truth. Very scary how easy it is to convince people. So can we solve the climate crisis in time? And I would prefer to think we can, and I would suggest health professionals and doctors have a role in doing this. And you might say, hang on, we're just doctors, we're not politicians. We're just doctors and health professionals. What can we do? Well, I would argue we've done it before and we can do it again. So for example, we led the world, the health professions led the world in ridding the world of, reducing the world risk from smoking. And in Australia, there have been terrific inroads for doing this. For example, the plain packaging laws in Australia, etc. But what's so interesting about the history of the smoking change is that the tobacco companies did exactly what the fossil fuel companies are now doing. They had spokespersons, including doctors, saying that there was no problem with smoking. In fact, smoking was good for you. There's a smoking scare. It's all misinformation. That's what they did. They did exactly what the fossil fuel companies are currently funding right now. They're funding the misinformation that we are seeing. There's no doubt about it, but we've done it. We can do it. What about vaping? Stroke of a pen. Done. Influenced by the community and by doctors. And I'm very pleased the MJA played a role in this, which the pro-vaping league still held me accountable for and continue to have a go at me online about, which I take as a badge of honour. A badge of honour that I'm attacked for having a small role to play in this happening. You heard this morning from Ginny, engineered stone. I'm so pleased about this. And I really think the MJA played a brilliant role in this. Literally, from case report to the end of it. Health hazard solved. Signed off, fixed. Quite amazing. And look what we're doing as taxpayers. This is for the Australians in the audience. Look at this. We spend it's $14.5 billion now. $14.5 billion of taxpayer money on fossil fuel subsidies. So in Norway, they tax the fossil fuel industry and give the kids a free university education. Here, we help the fossil fuel industry because they love us. They're so kind. They love us. And they do love us. They think we're wonderful, wonderful fools. Fools who give them the money so they can then make the money. And by the way, they pay almost no tax. Some of them pay zero tax or close to it. Terrifying. So we need to change this. We need to change this. And that would be the stroke of a pen. We could change the fossil fuel subsidies with a stroke of a pen. Yes, you'd have to transition, you'd have to protect the farmers. There are some issues. It's not straightforward. These are multiple subsidies, state and federal. But just imagine if every doctor in Australia said this has to change because fossil fuels are a health hazard. Just imagine if every doctor in Australia said that, loudly and clearly. We could make a change. Currently, there are 116 new oil and gas projects in the pipeline the government's likely to sign off on. That's our going to zero carbon emissions strategy. We're going to do more drilling, drill, baby, drill, and make more money for the Australian government. But we could stop all new oil and gas projects, phase out fossil fuels, and at least according to the experts I've spoken to, this could be done in a reasonable transition fashion. It would make a huge difference, although we would have less money coming into government, and that would be the price we would pay. But it would probably be worth it. So what can medical editors do in the climate emergency? I asked ChatGPT, and this is what ChatGPT said. It gave me 5 ideas for you guys, what you should be doing, all of you. You can publish research on the health impacts and make it a priority that you publish it. Gastroenterology could publish and gut could publish all about green endoscopy and keep pushing this hard because endoscopy is one of the major drivers of hospital greenhouse gas emissions with theatres, one of the major ones. And it should be changed. We can encourage authors to consider sustainable approaches. This is looking at ways they can reduce waste in their research. We don't talk about that terribly much. We can implement green publishing strategies. I'll come back to that in a moment. And there are ways to do this. We can raise awareness and advocate. We can really advocate through the pages of journals. And we can collaborate to work with health institutions to go green, basically, if we want to make a difference. Now, I'm going to pick on gastroenterology. I'm sorry, Paul, because I still receive in a plastic cover gastroenterology. I do not want a plastic cover on my journal, ever, ever, ever. I just don't. This is pollution. This is killing fish. This is killing people. This is just not on. And it's got to change. It hasn't changed yet as far as I know. It needs to change. That can be advocated by any journal editor who's still got a print journal that's being sent out to people. I'm not worried about the paper. The paper doesn't worry me that much, but the plastic really sets me on fire. So there we go. There we go. And I do apologise. But it's true. And look at the endoscopy waste on the pictures below. That's just after one procedure in the endoscopy suite. Look at the waste. Look at the waste. Think about single disposable endoscopes. They're just not on. We should be saying in the pages of our journals, not on, not acceptable. Because we can't afford to have this, in my view. We do have personal responsibility, and unfortunately, even if you drive a electric vehicle, as this gastroenterologist does, this is one gastroenterologist profile, air travel is one of the big things that drives up, greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a very difficult problem. I'm not saying this is easily solved, but certainly within our own personal perspectives, we can reduce things that may matter and at least provide some leadership there ourselves. What about hospitals? You're you're in a place near the hospital here. Healthcare systems over the whole planet account for about 7% of carbon emissions. That includes Australia's. And of course, we as health professionals need to make sure that carbon footprint is greatly reduced. Here at John Hunter Hospital, there's a really big push to go green. That includes electricity all done by solar panels. That includes really having net zero by 2030. And there's a great piece of work going on locally to do this. But it's very patchy across New South Wales, very patchy across Australia. The NHS has tackled this in a more systematic way. I'm really excited by what the NHS has been doing. Nick Watts, who's now in Singapore, drove this as the first Chief Sustainability Officer. He's an Australian. Really, they've made a significant impact on what's going on. And John Hunter, as I said, building a new hospital next door, and it's going to be as green as it possibly can. If you're interested in what companies are doing, companies are terrified by climate change. Most of the sensible ones anyway. The boards know they are at legal risk if they don't do something about this. Boards know this. Insurance companies are starting to have problems insuring everybody in the way they have. That is going to get worse and worse and worse. We're not going to be able to insure our houses or our places of work, possibly in the near future, because of the climate change risk and because, in fact, insurance companies know that it won't be worthwhile to continue insurance. And shareholders can make demands. Do you own shares? If you do, get out there and do something about climate change in the companies you own shares for. You can certainly do that, and it makes a difference. Well, I'm a technology guy, so I've got to ask this. Can technology save us? And there are geoengineering possibilities. This is Mammoth. This is Mammoth in Texas. Only in Texas would you have Mammoth. It's a planet-warming carbon dioxide remover. It is. They're building several of them in Texas. This one's in Iceland as well. And what will it remove? 1/millionth of global emissions. So they're going to build 7 of these in Texas and then drill, baby, drill. And they're going to produce 100 times more global emissions than they currently do. Yes, I don't think Mammoth's going to work. And unfortunately, the other solutions on my slide probably won't work either. So I tell people a few more things to wrap it up. First thing is, this is a great photograph. This is from the Voyager 1, 3.7 billion miles from Earth. And you can see that little dot in the distance. That's us. That's you and I, everybody. Everybody who's ever lived, everyone who will live here, everything that we know of in terms of life, it's right there. It's a tiny blue dot, and we need to look after it. And right now, this blue dot is at enormous risk. It's not just risk, it's absolute certainty, according to the science. And I believe science is pretty good in that respect, unfortunately. It's bad, but there's hope. We're not there yet. We haven't reached some of the tipping points that climate scientists worry about. We know there is an opportunity to intervene, but we are too slow and we're not just doing enough. It's as simple as that. So we need to do more. It's not too late, but if we don't all act now, well, our kids and our grandkids, their future does not look secure. And this mega trend will possibly be the mega trend that really drives destruction on the planet in the future if we don't do something about it. Now, I am somewhat conservative. Seriously, I'm somewhat conservative. I'm a doctor. I don't go to do protests and get locked up. I don't do anything like that. But I believe we need to step up going forward. So I have stepped up as best I can, and I have been certainly advocating for action as we go forward. Now, Richard Horton wrote about me actually in The Lancet, very kindly suggested that I was a very strange gastroenterologist because I still wore a tie. So I still wear a tie, yes. I'm still somewhat conservative, yes, but I'm absolutely committed to trying to make a change in terms of the climate action needed to move forward. I think we can make a difference, and journal editors, journals can make a real difference as well, but they need to speak up more. There's not enough happening. Let me challenge you, there is not enough happening in our journal pages. We need to educate ourselves and others. We need to get involved. We need to advocate. And journal editors need to lead. At least I would argue so. And I would also suggest that what in the world would be more important than saving it? I can't think of anything. So what drives me is what the future generations will see us as doing or not doing. My kids have asked me, what am I doing about climate change? I'd ask you, what are you doing about climate change? Have you done anything? And what should you do? I would challenge you to do more if you're doing something. And if you haven't done anything, I'd suggest to you it's about time you did. And certainly when I'm asked this question about what did I do, I hope I'll be able to say, and I hope you'll be able to say, that I acted with foresight, with courage, and with haste. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that frankly terrifying talk. We can open up for some questions. Jenny?
Thanks, Nick. It was terrifying and sort of inspiring in equal measure, so I hope that was kind of what you were intending. One thing I'll say we did last year for the MJA, which not everybody approved of, we actually cancelled. We didn't do the Christmas issue. We said we only had a certain number of pages. We devoted it to the climate issue quite deliberately. We got one very cross person who wrote to us about that. But I guess my question to you is two things. One is that, I mean, even though there is fake news, actually, people know this is happening. Even those that are kind of in denial actually know it's happening. The companies are they just in it for profit? Or is there something else psychologically going on here that we can try and address, I guess, at a population level? I mean, is everybody in denial? What's the, how can we actually try and change minds here?
So I think it's not very simple, actually. I think there are a couple of different cadres of people that are in positions of authority and leadership in companies who have different views. There's one group who just think, look, my job is to make a profit for shareholders. That's what my job is. That's why I'm the CEO of this company. And you talk to them and they say, look, I know where you're coming from. I know what you're saying. But frankly, that's what we're there for. And we need to change it. That requires government leadership to make change there. That's how you drive them in the direction you need. You can't drive them any other way. Shareholders, though, can do it too. Shareholders can potentially make it very uncomfortable for companies that come up with plans for mitigation that are complete nonsense. And that's what's happened with some of the fossil fuel companies. They've come up for this. There are others who say, well, actually, short term, I'm just going to make more of a profit and then we'll transition. I find that hard to believe, actually. I'll be perfectly frank, because I think the time is running out, and everybody knows that who's read the science. But there's a final group who are completely unable to see the story. For some reason, they think this is a left-wing conspiracy to change the world in some way that is socialist or some other crazy idea. They don't see the science is what it says and they've got to do something. They just see it as a conspiracy. That's very hard to deal with. And all I can say is those deluded people, some of whom are influential, by the way, the only way to deal with them is to just overwhelm them with opinions from others. That's the only way I can see it happening. Rational arguments don't work because they don't listen to the rational arguments. And they don't believe the science behind the rational arguments, which makes it even harder.
Thanks very much, Nick. Great talk, very sort of inspiring. But first of all, congratulations on the vaping story. That's great. Well done. Which hasn't happened in Canada, so we need you to come over to Canada to change our country. But what I would say is the difference with vaping is that there isn't, first of all, Rupert Murdoch doesn't care about it.
True.
And not only that, it is a money-making industry, but not to the extent that the fossil fuel industry is. And I'll put it to you, the problem we have and why you have a substantial proportion of the population, including doctors who think this is a hoax, is that you have power in the hand of a few small people. And social media hasn't made that any better. In fact, it's made it worse. So shouldn't we be thinking of systems that do give the power back to the people rather than it being influenced by a few very rich, sometimes misguided individuals?
So I completely agree that there's a huge amount of money in fossil fuel production, and we still need fossil fuels at the moment to power our industries and power our air conditioners. So there's no doubt we're talking transition, not sudden change, because that would not work anyway, at least not if we want to keep society going the way it currently is. Mind you, if we keep going as we're going, then we won't have a society to worry about, but that's a different story. We had a very good discussion at Doctors for the Environment Australia where we had people from the political end of the spectrum and people from the community end talking about how do we make change and what happens. And the conclusion of that debate was actually you need both ends to work. You need the top down, you need the leaders, the political leaders to make some decisions and signal where this is going and have courage, because it takes real courage to challenge these companies. They are multinational, huge companies with huge pockets, and politicians are frightened of them, some of them anyway. But you also need the bottom-up approach. You need the community to be on side, because politicians get elected, at least in democracies, and therefore people realise when there's a community surge, that really does collect their attention. So I think you need both of those factors to work to change things. How do you fix the few people who control the press and have enormous power in the hands of so many few billionaires? Very difficult to know what to do. We live in a free society. We are in a sense locked in to the current model. But I think we can change things if the community is aware. What worries me is we'll wait until it's too late for the community to really get upset, because that's when things will change. But if we've missed the boat, if we can't reverse where we are, then perhaps that'll be too late. That's what really worries me. That's why the tipping point argument is the scariest part of this. If we get tipping points and they really happen, everyone will be incredibly upset. There will be change, but that may not help us. That is what worries me the most.
Just following on from a point that you discussed with Jenny's question, I think there is a general consensus in the community that climate change is a problem, but I wonder sometimes if people see it as a kind of a broader, far-away problem, and there's less evidence of the direct impact on the individual, so people are kind of saying, well, it's a problem for everybody, it doesn't affect me now. Do we need to see more research looking at direct health outcomes or pathology that's related to climate change? Do we need to see more journals focusing or having calls to try and see what's the evidence for a story that shows people that there is a direct impact on their health and they should start worrying now?
So two very good points there. One is we talk about 2050, which is 25 years away, and we say that's when we have to be, green. Well, and then people say, well, we can wait till 2049 and then we can go green, in a year. That's how people think. It's absolutely the wrong message, and that's one of the messages that really concerns me. So I think we've got that issue. And the other issue is, I think like smoking, fossil fuels killing you is a silent killer. It's just not obvious directly. People who smoke don't die straight away, usually anyway. They die 20 years later. And it's the same with fossil fuels. It's the same issue. So this is an indirect killer. And the problem is people don't recognise it. But again, education through the pages of journals and in other ways could make a real difference. And I think we really need to do more. The more we can do, the better. there's still enormous ignorance out there about the health impact of climate change, the health impact of fossil fuels. You could argue that many people do not know fossil fuels kill you or cause serious disease. They just don't recognise it. And that's a terrible problem.
Thank you. I think this is more of a comment, and it really follows on from the moderator's point that I don't know why, but in your slides, when I saw, you see the pictures of the massive disasters and it just feels hopeless and too big. But then you see the pictures, the one you showed with the bin overflowing with plastic waste. And that for some reason, that's really affecting. And it makes me think that, it's less easy to politicise images like that, or images. I saw one the other day of a beach and just the pieces of plastic they were pulling out of the sand. And so maybe that's a really great approach to take it back to that really small individual level that's less easy to corrupt with politics. And just a thought.
I agree. I think the plastic waste issue is really easy to see. We went plogging on Merriweather Beach, which means picking up all the plastic and other pollution, with a group of people, health workers from John Hunter. We did this on Sunday. It's really inspiring to have that small group of people turn up to plog. But, it's clear a lot of people just don't think about this waste at all, and yet it's impacting everybody and everything we eat and drink. So that is really the scary part. So I agree, that's a very good point. We also think the fact that fossil fuels are a health hazard is hard to politicise. We're not talking about climate change now. We're saying if you dig up coal, if you transport coal, if you burn coal, if you dispose of coal, that is a health hazard. And there's no doubt about that. The science is absolutely clear. It's got nothing to do with climate change. But mind you, climate change is a huge problem too, which of course is clearly related to this. So, trying to divorce or separate those issues out and argue cases where people can understand clearly, including health professionals, I think that's important. And there are doctors who've come up to me and said, this is a hoax. I've heard this. This is rubbish. You're on the wrong track. And I really worry. They don't understand the science. They haven't read the science. They haven't thought about what the issues are. I actually went and did a Harvard course on climate change and health. So I thought I'd better learn the science if I'm going to do anything about this. And I wanted to understand it a little bit better. All I came away with is a bit of depression, actually, after that course. It didn't improve my mood at all over a few months. But anyway, that was the point.
I know there's a few more questions in the audience, but I think in the interest of time, we'll have to move them to the break. So once again, can ask for a round of applause for a fantastic presentation. And we're going to take a break now for 5 minutes and resume at 3:15.
Thanks, Simon, very much.